"Your career is over, Kash," said Jasmine Crockett boldly, her voice slicing through the charged air of the live broadcast studio like a blade through silk. The rhetoric of her accusation hung heavy, a gauntlet thrown down before a stunned audience, as she leaned forward, eyes blazing with righteous fury. Kash Patel, smug and unyielding, sneered from across the polished table, his fingers drumming a defiant rhythm. The host, caught off guard, fumbled with her notes, but the cameras stayed locked on the two titans, their animosity crackling like a storm about to break. This was no mere debate. It was a collision of wills, fueled by a betrayal that had simmered for years, now erupting under the unforgiving glare of the public eye. The argument had ignited over a leaked government report, one that Kash had brazenly waved on air, claiming it exposed corruption tied to Jasmine's allies in Congress. His voice dripped with venom as he read aloud, "Sensitive financial records, hidden deals, and names you all know." The crowd gasped, but Jasmine's face hardened. She knew the report was a fabrication, a twisted web of lies spun by Kash to discredit her and her colleagues. Years ago they had worked together on a classified task force, and Kash, embittered by his own failures, had vowed to ruin her. Now he saw his chance, using the live broadcast to hurl accusations that could shatter her reputation. "You're done, Crockett," he spat, leaning back with a smirk. "The truth is out." Jasmine clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wouldn't let this snake slither away. "You think you can lie your way into power?" she shot back, her voice low but lethal. The audience leaned in, sensing blood in the water. She pointed at the report, her gaze never leaving Kash. "That paper is as fake as your integrity. You forged it to smear good people." The host tried to interject, but Jasmine waved her off. "No, let him squirm. He's been planning this for years." Kash's eyes narrowed, his composure slipping as her words hit home. The studio felt smaller, the air thick with their mutual loathing. Kash leaned forward, his voice a hiss. "You have no proof, Jasmine, just your loud mouth and empty threats." But she was ready. She pulled a folder from her bag, slamming it on the table. "This," she said, "is the real report. The one you buried because it showed your own shady deals." The crowd erupted, whispers turning to shouts. Kash's face paled, but he doubled down, snarling, "You're desperate, making it up as you go." Jasmine didn't flinch. She opened the folder, revealing documents stamped with official seals. "Desperate? No, Kash, I'm prepared. Unlike you, I don't need lies to win." The host, sensing the chaos escalating, called for a break, but neither combatant backed down. Jasmine's voice rose, sharp and unyielding. "You've been running from the truth since we worked together, always scheming, always hiding. But not today." Kash scoffed, but his hands trembled slightly, betraying his bravado. The audience was riveted, their murmurs a low hum of anticipation. Jasmine knew she had him cornered, but Kash was dangerous when backed against a wall. As the segment ended, he leaned close, whispering so only she could hear, "This isn't over, Crockett. You'll regret this." Her eyes burned with defiance. She was just getting started. The broadcast resumed, and the tension in the studio coiled, tighter, like a spring ready to snap. Jasmine Crockett sat ramrod straight, her folder of damning documents open before her, each page a weapon aimed at Kash Patel's crumbling facade. He slouched slightly, his earlier arrogance fraying, but his eyes glinted with a predator's cunning. The audience, still buzzing from the last segment, hushed as the host, now visibly nervous, steered the conversation back to the explosive claims. "Ms. Crockett, you say these documents prove Mr. Patel's deception. Can you elaborate?" Jasmine's lips curled into a steely smile. She was ready to bury him. "Let's talk facts," Jasmine said, her voice clear and cutting, slicing through Kash's attempt to interrupt. She held up a page from her folder, its text dense with numbers and dates. This is a financial audit from our task force days. It shows Kash funneling funds to unverified accounts, accounts he never reported. The crowd murmured, shock rippling through them. Kash's jaw tightened, and he snapped, "That's a lie! You fabricated that to save your own skin!" But his voice cracked, betraying his panic. Jasmine pressed on, relentless. "Save my skin? No, Kash. I'm exposing yours. You thought you could erase this, but truth doesn't vanish." Kash lunged forward, slamming his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You're out of your depth, Crockett. Nobody believes your pathetic little story." The audience gasped, some leaning back, others craning forward, drawn to the raw hostility. Jasmine didn't blink. She slid another document across the table, her movements deliberate, like a chess player delivering checkmate. "This is a signed affidavit from a task force colleague confirming your transactions. Want to call him a liar, too?" Kash's face twisted, rage and fear warring in his expression. He was unraveling, and everyone could see it. The host, desperate to regain control, stammered, "Mr. Patel, your response?" But Kash ignored her, his focus locked on Jasmine. "You think you're clever, digging up old dirt? I've got more on you, Crockett, enough to make you wish you'd stayed quiet." His voice was a low growl, dripping with menace. Jasmine leaned closer, her eyes blazing. "Try it, Kash. Every lie you tell digs your grave deeper." The air between them crackled, their mutual hatred a living thing, palpable to every viewer. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word, as if one wrong move could ignite a fire. Jasmine flipped to another page, her voice steady, but laced with contempt. "Here's a memo you wrote, Kash, directing staff to shred evidence. You thought it was gone, didn't you?" She held it up for the cameras, letting the audience see the scrawled signature. Kash's hands clenched, his knuckles white. "You're twisting everything," he shouted, but his protest sounded hollow, desperate. The host tried to pivot, but Jasmine cut her off. "No, let him answer. Why did you hide this, Kash? What were you so afraid of?" The question hung like a blade, and Kash's silence was deafening. As the segment closed, he glared at her, his breathing heavy, a cornered animal ready to strike. Jasmine met his gaze, unflinching, knowing she had drawn blood but sensing the fight was far from over. The studio pulsed with raw energy as the broadcast barreled into its next segment, the air thick with the stench of Kash Patel's desperation. Jasmine Crockett sat poised, her documents spread like a battle map, each one a nail in the coffin of Kash's credibility. He hunched forward, sweat beading on his brow, his earlier swagger replaced by a caged animal's fury. The audience, gripped by the unfolding drama, watched with bated breath, their murmurs a low hum of anticipation. The host, now resigned to the chaos, nodded at Jasmine. "Ms. Crockett, you've made serious accusations. What's next?" Jasmine's eyes glinted, sharp as a blade. She was ready to drive the final stake through Kash's lies. She picked up a thin, worn ledger, its pages yellowed but intact. "This," she said, her voice steady, slicing through the tension, "is the original task force log. It records every meeting, every decision. Guess whose name appears next to the order to destroy?" "Evidence?" She paused, letting the question linger, her gaze locked on Kash. He squirmed, his fingers twitching. "You're grasping at straws, Crockett," he snarled, but his voice wavered, thin and unconvincing. Jasmine slid the ledger toward the host, who glanced at it, eyes widening. "Page 47, Jasmine said. "Read it." The host hesitated, then read aloud, "Kash Patel, Directive to dispose of financial records, dated March 2018. The crowd erupted, shouts of disbelief mingling with gasps. Kash shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "That's a fake! You planted it!" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine. Spit flecked his lips, his composure shattered. Jasmine rose too, matching his height, her presence commanding. Planted? No, Kash. You're the one who's been planting lies for years, thinking you'd never get caught. Her words were calm but venomous, each one landing like a whip. The audience leaned forward, some shaking their heads, others whispering furiously. Kash's eyes darted to the cameras, then back to Jasmine, wild with rage. "You'll pay for this," he hissed, low enough for only her to hear. She didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out a photograph, grainy but clear, and held it up. "This is you, Kash, meeting with a known fixer to cover your tracks, taken 2 weeks after you ordered the shredding." The image showed Kash in a dimly lit alley, handing an envelope to a shadowed figure. The crowd's noise swelled, a wave of outrage. Kash's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You're making this up," he stammered, but the photograph was undeniable. Jasmine pressed forward, relentless. "Making it up? I've got witnesses, Kash. People you bullied into silence. They're done protecting you." The host, sensing the moment's weight, tried to steer back to civility, but Jasmine cut her off. "No, he doesn't get to hide. He's been dodging accountability his whole career, but not anymore." Kash lunged toward the table, snatching at the ledger, but Jasmine was faster, pulling it back. "Don't touch it," she snapped, her voice a whip crack. He froze, breathing heavily, his hands balled into fists. The audience was electric, their cheers for Jasmine mingling with jeers for Kash. As the segment wound down, he sank into his chair, defeated but still glaring, his hatred a smoldering ember. Jasmine stood tall, her resolve unshaken, knowing she was close to ending his reign of deceit, but bracing for his final desperate move. The studio crackled with the weight of impending ruin as the broadcast roared into its penultimate segment. Jasmine Crockett stood like a sentinel, her evidence a fortress around her, each document and photograph a brick in the wall of Kash Patel's downfall. Kash slumped in his chair, his face a mask of fury and fear, his hands gripping the tables, edge as if to anchor himself against the tide of truth. The audience, now a sea of restless energy, whispered and shifted, their eyes darting between Jasmine's calm resolve and Kash's unraveling defiance. The host, her voice unsteady, ventured, "Ms. Crockett, you've presented compelling evidence. Do you have more?" Jasmine's nod was slow, deliberate, a promise of destruction. She reached into her folder, producing a small sealed envelope, its surface embossed with a government crest. "This," she said, her voice a quiet blade, "is a letter from the task force's former director, written before he retired." She broke the seal, unfolding the paper with care. It details Kash's attempts to blackmail colleagues into falsifying reports. The crowd's murmur swelled into a roar, disbelief and anger colliding. Kash's eyes widened, his breath hitching. "That's a lie," he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table, the sound a desperate echo of his fading power. "You forged. That, Crockett, you conniving—" Jasmine cut him off, her voice rising like a storm. "Conniving? No, Kash. That's your game. This letter names dates, places, even the threats you used." Kash lurched forward, his face twisted with venom. "You think you can parade your little papers and ruin me? I've got friends in high places, Crockett. You're nothing." His voice cracked, raw with panic, but Jasmine stood her ground, unshaken. She held up the letter, letting the cameras zoom in on the director's signature, bold and unmistakable. "Friends? You mean the ones you betrayed? This letter says you sold them out to save yourself." The audience gasped, some shouting, their outrage a living pulse. Kash's hands shook, his bravado crumbling like dry earth. "You're bluffing," he muttered, but the words were hollow, a dying man's plea. Jasmine stepped closer to the table, her presence towering. "Bluffing? I've got recordings, Kash. Your voice, your deals, your lies." She tapped her folder, her eyes boring into his. Want me to play them for the world? The threat hung heavy, a guillotine poised, to fall. Cash's face contorted, sweat dripping down his temple. You wouldn't dare, he hissed, but his voice was a whisper, fear overtaking fury. The host, wide-eyed, stammered, Recordings? Can we hear them? Jasmine shook her head, her gaze never leaving Kash. Not yet, he knows what's coming. Let him sweat. The crowd cheered, their voices a chorus of support, drowning out Kash's weak protests. The segment's end loomed, but the battle raged on. Kash, cornered, tried one last jab. You'll crash and burn, Crockett. Nobody trusts you. His words were a snarl, but they lacked bite, a final gasp from a sinking ship. Jasmine leaned in, her voice low, lethal. Trust? You wouldn't. Know it if it bit you. The world sees you now, Kash. A liar. A coward. The audience roared, their cheers a thunderclap as Kash sank back, his eyes burning with impotent rage. Jasmine gathered her papers, her movements precise, a warrior readying for the final blow. The host called for a pause, but the air vibrated, with the promise of Kash's end, and Jasmine knew she was one step from victory. The final segment of the broadcast erupted like a volcano, the studio a crucible of raw emotion and unyielding truth. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of the storm, her folder now a symbol of justice, its contents the key to Kash Patel's utter defeat. Kash sat hunched, his face ashen, his eyes darting like a trapped rat's, the weight of his exposed lies crushing him. The audience, a roaring tide of anticipation, leaned forward, their cheers for Jasmine a steady drumbeat. The host, her voice, barely steady, addressed the room. Ms. Crockett, you've mentioned recordings. Can we hear them? Jasmine's smile was sharp, a warrior's promise of victory. This was the moment she'd waited for. She pulled a small device from her pocket, its sleek surface glinting under the camera's gaze. This, she said, her voice clear and unyielding, holds Kash's own words, recorded during a meeting he thought was secret. She pressed play, and Kash's voice filled the studio, cold and calculating. Bury the audit. Threaten them if you have to. Nobody crosses me. The crowd gasped, their outrage a living force, as the recording continued, detailing his schemes. To frame colleagues. Kash's head snapped up, his mouth open in horror. That's not me, he stammered. But the lie was feeble, drowned by the truth. Jasmine stopped the device, her eyes locked on him. Not you? Then why's your voice shaking, Kash? He lurched to his feet, his chair toppling with a crash. You're a fraud, Crockett. You edited that to frame me. His voice was a desperate howl, but the audience jeered, their boos a chorus of rejection. Jasmine stepped forward, her presence a towering force. Frame you? No, Kash. You framed yourself years ago. This is just the world catching up. She turned to the crowd, holding up the device. This recording, these documents, they're going to the authorities. Your schemes end today. The audience erupted, their cheers a thunderous wave, shaking the room with their support. Kash's hands trembled, his face a mask of defeat, but he tried one last venomous jab. You think you've won? You're nothing but a loudmouth with a grudge. His words were a dying gasp, empty against Jasmine's resolve. She leaned across the table, her voice low, cutting like steel. A grudge? No, Kash. This is justice. You betrayed everyone who trusted you, but I'm the one who stopped you. The crowd roared louder, some standing, their applause a tidal wave. Kash sank back, his eyes hollow, the fight drained from him. The host, overwhelmed, could only nod, her role dwarfed by Jasmine's triumph. As the broadcast neared its close, Jasmine gathered her evidence, her movements calm, deliberate, a victor surveying the battlefield. The truth always wins, she said, addressing the audience, her voice ringing with conviction. No lie can outrun it. The crowd's cheers swelled, a final salute to her courage. Kash sat silent, a broken man, his career in ruins, his name forever tied to deceit. The host closed the show, but the cameras lingered on Jasmine, her head high, her victory absolute. She walked off the set, the audience's applause echoing behind her, a beacon of truth who had faced a liar and won, leaving no doubt that justice had prevailed.